Back with the 10-minute war, where we sit down and attempt to have a reasonable conversation with maybe the only reasonable Ohio State fan that I could find. Our good friend Mark Rogers, the voice of college football, who himself has a fantastic YouTube page. How are you, Mark?
I'm doing just fine, and certainly if there's anything we need in this situation regarding whether it be Big Ten football or national situations is reason. We all far short of it are out there.
Yes, and reasons, right? So since you and I last talked, Kevin Warren issued a clarification, which is literally nothing other than he went to like the Worldometer Johns Hopkins website and like cut and paste the latest pandemic data and put it in a statement. That's literally what they did. I mean, there's no specifics whatsoever. Since this went down, you and I talked about this last time. We've already had the saliva testing, right, from the NBA Players Association, and the University of Illinois here in our league has developed its own protocol where that's concerned. But now we are seeing studies come out that are contradicting the JAMA study on myocarditis. That was apparently the final nail in the coffin from the Big Ten president's perspective. We're seeing case numbers have gone down in America now 5 weeks in a row. We have the lowest, as of today, the fewest hospitalizations with COVID symptoms in America since March 21st. Los Angeles County, which was one of the biggest surges in new cases here with the recent summertime spike in the Sun Belt states, and then California, they had their lowest hospitalizations since April 3rd. We have the 1.9% of ER visits in America are for COVID symptoms, which means 98.1% of people are going to the ER for something other than COVID. I mean, the numbers are really looking good. I mean, the Sun Belt wave has completely collapsed and crashed. They're even going to play high school football in New Jersey next month now, Mark. That's the most densely populated state in the country, still number 2 for deaths in coronavirus with how hard hit they were. Yeah, they're going to play high school football there. The pressure remains on. We did have the parents show up last Friday. They put forth now another letter today. They've lawyered up. Tom Mars is involved with a FOIA request. At the very least, Mark, I think the odds that we're going to come out of the first of the year and see football in January in the Big Ten have increased substantially with the amount of pressure that's being applied. But what do you think?
Well, when you put the case out there in regards to why the decision was so bad, the one word that comes to mind, and this came not just from people that were hell-bent on playing football, this came from other people that were taking the pandemic extremely seriously and saying, you know, the health of the players should be first and foremost. The one word that comes to mind through this entire process that Kevin Warren and the Big Ten did not do was wait. If there was a situation in which time was on your side and could be taken to your advantage, to a certain extent, of course, it was to wait and use that time to understand the landscape, gather more information, see how it plays out, watch the barometer of the other conferences for as much as you want to be autonomous. And, of course, they all 5 are technically, from a PR standpoint, they needed to be talking about the Big Ten on the pulse of the other 3 and seeing where this was headed in regards to the approach of the other 3. And they just failed miserably in regards to all of that. So the pressure is being put on heavily. So I would agree that while we were sitting here a week ago and many of those moves had started to come to fruition in regards to the parents forming, the players forming, the letters and the communications, that they are relentless right now, and they're becoming more of a force from a legal standpoint, and not just a clanging cymbal of sorts of just being loud and obnoxious and in your face. They are taking measured steps to getting something done here, and it's going to be fascinating to see now that Kevin Warren has doubled down to say, no, we're not playing football. We've made our decision. And he released his second statement when he was, of course, in Minneapolis while the throng was in Chicago awaiting him. I didn't understand their tact there, but that's about the only misstep maybe that they've made, is that, yes, the heat is on, the pressure's on, and we'll see if a conference that is full of presidents that obviously with all the data and with all the analysis that pointed in the other direction, to at least wait, if not chart the course toward playing football, that it looks like that they might, I don't know if they can hold on to this position any longer. If they are, then they really had determined a long, long time ago to not play football.
We talked over at Wolverine Digest, that's the website I own, that covers Michigan for Sports Illustrated. We talked to several people in the Big Ten and in the administration at Michigan for a story we ran yesterday. And what we found in the people we talked to is that they don't believe that if the vote was held right now, that there would have been a vote to cancel. The vote right now would have been, there would have been some presidents that voted to cancel, but the league would have voted as a majority to align itself with the timetable of the SEC and push it to the end of September as a start date. That the athletic directors were actually 14-0 to play football this fall. And it was the university presidents that ended up overruling them. Also that that the pressure on doing this in January, they are feeling it and it's growing. And a lot of the athletic directors are facing that pressure from within their own donor networks now as we grow closer to the season and seeing the other three leagues going forward. And that the Big Ten thought all along the ACC was going to be its trump card. There's a lot of elite level public universities in the ACC, like North Carolina, Virginia, for example. You have Notre Dame in Miami, which are private schools, but those are considered two elite private schools. Notre Dame's one of the top 15 universities in the country. And so there was the assumption by the Big Ten presidents that a lot of like-minded academics in the ACC were going to come forward and say, you're right, it's too dangerous to play football, and that they would align with the Big Ten and essentially corner the SEC into saying, hey, rednecks, that's the way the Big Ten presidents think. You rednecks down there, you can't risk these kids' lives playing football, shut her down. And so when the ACC was like, well, we're actually going to do research and see if we can play. And we're going to go get, Duke, Wake Forest. There's some pretty good med schools. We're going to, put them in charge of this and see what they come up with. They were shocked, the Big Ten was, that the ACC decided to see if it was possible to play rather than just joining the Big Ten and shutting it down right at the forefront. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that the Big Ten certainly was in a situation in which they thought there's just too much information. In this day and age, there's too much information out there that even if the general public isn't privy or smart enough to put it together initially, there's just too much information that you gain a level of groupthink in a good way on the other side, meaning enough data analysis, enough reasonable thought that circulates becomes common knowledge that can refute the decision that's made. So it's difficult to pull the wool over the public's eyes in this day and age of information share. And what happened was the Big Ten thought that it could get away with the over-encompassing statement or commitment to the health of the student athlete, and that any reasoning that they gave, even if it didn't make sense on a calendar, if it didn't make sense in regards to long-term effects, all the things that we've talked about made absolutely no sense, that the sheer statement of looking out for the student athlete's best interests would be taken as is and would be good enough for them. Yeah, I just think that they obviously didn't have as good a communication or collaboration with the other conferences
or even with themselves. I mean, the Omaha World Herald talked to the AD at Nebraska, Bill Moos, and he said that really Kevin Warren went in there solo. He didn't get the ADs on his side. Kind of just his, rookie voyage. I'm the know-it-all. I kind of know everything. I'm just going to do this on my own, and went in there with no allies at all and got rolled by the presidents. That's what Bill Moos at Nebraska said. So let's do this. Let's switch gears, because I talked about this at the top of the show this week. I can't help but notice the cultural differences in how Michigan and Ohio State are responding to the coronavirus. And let me say this. I mean, Jim Harbaugh put out a phenomenal statement with all kinds of specifics of Michigan's testing protocols, data points, etc. When the whole "let them play" hashtag was trending worldwide on Twitter, I mean, he was at the forefront of that. Okay, I think whether you like Jim Harbaugh or not, whether you think he's a great football coach or you don't, I think his love of the game is without doubt. I mean, he would go play in a street if they let him do that, right? So this really isn't about him. But I did find these things interesting, and I'm going to reset these, Mark, and get your take on them. Okay. I mean, at Michigan, we've got players like Jalen Mayfield, Ambry Thomas declaring early for the NBA or the NFL draft. Ohio State has a likely first-round draft pick in Justin Fields, likely #1 overall draft pick. Another likely first-round draft pick in Shaun Wade. I mean, they're still fighting to play college football, and our guys were like, a couple days after, well, okay, guess I'm going to the draft. That's one thing that kind of stood out to me. Here's another thing that stood out to me when I compare the cultures of these two teams as well. That Ohio State's players put out a statement countering the Pac-12 and the Big Ten player grievances, saying they don't believe they're being exploited, felt their safety was taken seriously in Columbus. And I look at this because from the Michigan side of things, and some of it is the academic arrogance of Michigan. It's perennially rated among the top public universities in the world. And Ohio State, to be fair, has tremendously improved its academic standing in recent years. It's now considered a top 40 university in the country. That wasn't the case 10, 15, 20 years ago. But some of this is Michigan's intellectual arrogance that Ohio State's a football factory and we are not, right? But for this notion that Ohio State, that we have on the Michigan side, that players are just chattel there, they don't care about the whole person, you're just there to major in football, the whole Cardale Jones line. I mean, they didn't recruit me to play school. Remember when he said that, right? Yet, what is fascinating, and maybe this wasn't true under John Cooper, it's certainly true under Urban Meyer and now Ryan Day, that for all of the 4- and 5-star recruits that Ohio State gets, and Michigan gets its share, but not as many as Ohio State. But for all of those elite recruits Ohio State has, for all the NFL draft prospects it produces each and every year, there does seem to be more of a traditional college football culture at Ohio State than Michigan. I mean, Michigan had guys last year talking about Donovan Peoples-Jones, for example, calling up, OBJ, maybe I shouldn't play and sit out the season, don't want to hurt my draft stock, And, I mean, I love the idea that Jim Harbaugh has of putting together an NFL scouting combine for scouts at the end of October to give his players something to shoot for. I love that idea, but it still kind of is fascinating that Ohio State's out there from the AD on down, hey, man, we're doing everything we can right now to play as soon as we can. And Michigan's like, dude, we shot our wad, sucked, we're not playing, but let's get ready for the draft. I don't know. Maybe I'm blowing this out of proportion. I'm just looking for something after 15 years of ass whoopings. But it does kind of seem like the secret sauce here for Ohio State, because I went back and studied this, Mark. Y'all have always had more talent than us. That's never not been the case. You're in the #1 talent hotbed in our demographic, #1. But I think that there's just a college football esprit de corps culture there that for whatever reason we lost when Lloyd Carr stepped aside. And for all the success Jim has had, it's still more of an NFL-style program than a college program. You know what I'm trying to say a little bit?
Absolutely. I'm right there with you. And for the record, people don't like this when I state this on my channel in other terms. I like Jim Harbaugh. I admire Jim Harbaugh. I'm going to fall short of saying he's a great football coach because I think that word's thrown around too much, but he's a very good football coach that has built programs across the board wherever he's been. Just check the record. And I love the only week that I ever hated Jim Harbaugh was, of course, when he made the guarantee in '86 and then he pulled through in Columbus. But other than that, I admire Jim Harbaugh, and I think he's a perfect fit for the program. Yet to get it done, yes. But culture difference, Steve, this is what makes rivalries great. The on-the-field competition, which we haven't had for 15 years, but we still have elite programs. But off the field, it's the cultural similarities or the cultural differences that make a rivalry great. And say what you will about Ohio State dominating on the field and pretty much being either better or even with Michigan since Woody Hayes took over in 1951. Ohio State has always had the mentality that it's playing catch up to Michigan. It lost the first 13 games of the series. Academically inferior, although it's taken the strides that you just mentioned. From a cultural standpoint, and I lived this out in regards to my transition of living in a silo, in a bubble, in a vacuum, echo chamber of Ohio State fans while I was growing up. And then once I got into the world, got to college, went to work for the first time and started running into more Michigan fans, I started to see that the rivalry didn't mean as much to them. There was Notre Dame, there was Michigan State, and yeah, Ohio State was probably the biggest rivalry, but it was one of three. Whereas tunnel focus, vision, laser focus on Ohio State, at Ohio State is Michigan. And when you talk culture, that's just, man, it's an elusive term, but it's so important to what you can do and accomplish in any walk of life involving multiple people. You need to build a culture, and for some way, you know, I give Jim Tressel a lot of credit because he had the great guarantee when he stepped on campus, you know, in 325 days, we're going to be proud of our student athletes in Ann Arbor. And he always stated that he would take the player that was that less talented, but probably grew up in Ohio, although they've been found, Justin Fields and J.K. Dobbins and others, Sean Wade, and look at the passion of his family and his father to play football. Mm-hmm. From Florida, but somehow that culture's been built, and it's been, I don't know, it's the passion, the people, the ability to communicate, a vision, a mission that is just relentless there. And of course, the clock with the days and the time of the next Michigan game is still in the Ohio State facility. They could beat Michigan 100 years in a row, and it's still this mentality that they're the target. And man, we're still, man, I don't want to use a Mike Hart phrase at all, but still, they're the aim and the goal, regardless of how good we are on the field.
Well, if you're going to have the more talented program, and Ohio State historically has been, but now you're going to give them the cultural advantage and chip on their shoulder as well, that's how you lose 15 years in a row to them. In a rivalry game, is you've handed them now better personnel, but also they've got more of a raw college football culture at the same time. Great stuff as always, Mark. Good to see you, brother. Thanks for joining us this week.
Thank you so much, Steve.